Governance Committee. Welcome to those who are also online, and a reminder that this meeting is recorded. Before I proceed to anything else, just a mention on the fire procedure. We'll run through that in the usual way. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting, so if we hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. Nearest escape route is via the stairs to your left, that way, as you leave the council chamber or public gallery. There is no one there. Exit via the back door at the back of the building. Walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Of course, the lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it is safe to do so by a member of staff. I'm sure you'll comply with that. I think in all my time here on the council, that's only occurred to me once for an alarm. Good morning, Councillor Redborough. Okay, and I'll just let you take your seat. Yeah, you're fine. So. First item of business, apologies. I have been sent an apology from Councillor Luciani. She is on leave. Have we any other apologies? No, Councillor Churchman may be late. I do know that she sometimes struggles to get through traffic. And there are otherwise no changes to our membership this morning. Thank you. So next item of business is the minutes of our previous meeting. That's on pages 5 to 10 of our pack. Colleagues, any amendments to make? Otherwise, I shall move from the chair that they be approved. Seconded by Councillor Jarman. Those in favour of approving, please show. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Bottom of the page, isn't it? I've only been doing this 3.5 years, you know, so. Having signed those, just colleagues, if you haven't signed the sign-in sheet, just remember to do so as well. So. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Any interest? Claire, Councillor Jarman.
Chair, I wonder if we could have a standing declarations of interest. Clearly, wherever we have items on the audit process or on the work plan, which consider or have an impact on or from the pension fund, I, as a member of, in fact, chair of the Right Pension Committee, declare an interest, as I did indeed last time in the minutes we just agreed. Also, a number of us are members of the working group on the constitutional process, and we declare that each time as well. So could we have a sort of standing declaration of those until those are resolved?
I don't think there was a procedure formally to allow for a standing one. The working group on the governance, though, did disband earlier this year, so you aren't required to declare that because you have ceased your interest. We are now the body that is looking at the governance side of things, but generally, I'm not sure, though, if you are a member of committee, actually to what extent you have an interest that's declarable anyway, but it's always, I think for the interest of transparency, it's good to have those, but I'm afraid for at least the next 2 meetings, Councillor Jarman will probably just have to pipe up and just say.
Well,
but I'll try and remember
to do some cutting and pasting then. Thank you.
I'm sure Megan will recall that anyway. She's super efficient as always. So if you can, anybody else with an interest to declare? As always, if you do think of anything during the meeting, immediately indicate and we'll take that. Okay. Lovely. Public question time. No questions have been submitted and there is no person in the public gallery. And no one has indicated otherwise to try to do so online. Okay. So we move swiftly to item 5, which is our external audit update. And we have Kevin Souter, Mr. Souter, and Ms. Jones, Jason Jones. Do you have another colleague online with you as well?
No, just the two of us today, Chair.
Just the two of us. So first of all, I just record my thanks to both Kevin and Jason for their briefing that they give me now regularly ahead of these meetings. That they're always very useful. But I will now hand over to Mr. Sue to start off with, just to introduce your paper and highlight the concern that I know you will highlight to us.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So our update this morning starts on page 11 of your agenda pack, and it's to explain the position regarding your statement of accounts and the audit for both 22-23 and 23-24 financial years. So if we start with the year 22-23, which is on page 14 of the agenda pack, there has been significant movement in respect to the steps needed to complete audits and clear the accumulated backlog. That started the day after your last committee with a ministerial statement made on the 30th of July 2024. And the Minister set out the intent to continue the previous trajectory of work under the previous government and to implement the legislation to put in the backstop dates. So following that announcement, in September, the legislation has been put before Parliament, and this should come into force today. Backstop dates have been set for audits up to the 22-23 year, and they are to be completed and published by the 13th of December 2024. So that means audits have to be done by that date, with you publishing your accounts and the audit report, and that's irrespective of the audit progress. So if work isn't completed, we have to form an audit report based upon the work we have done. But if it's not complete, that essentially means some sort of modification or qualification to the audit report. Now, we previously set out our strategy was not to attempt to do the 22-23 audit, and we would be planning to issue disclaimer. So that would get us up to date in terms of moving on to the current financial information across our portfolio of audits. So now that legislation has been laid, we are moving that forward. We aim to complete all our work across all the affected local authorities by the end of November. So that gives time to give the output of that information to you to meet your new committee timetable, which is going to be on the 9th of December. So that's a little bit tight, but it is sufficient to allow you to receive our final report on those accounts. It will include the disclaimer opinion, and then those can be published and put on the council's website by the backstop date of the 13th of December. So that will then close out the 22-23 audit. So then we move on to the position regarding 23-24, which is on page 16 of the papers. So having had that legislation published, which I've just referred to, and guidance given to us by the FRC, there is a significant amount of work we have to do in a short period of time. And we have had to revisit our resourcing and prioritisation position because our resources are finite, and that's a significant amount of additional work that we have now to do. We signalled the intent for this via letters to all Section 151 officers on the 21st of August from our cluster leader. And we set out that we'd be looking at authorities that hadn't published accounts by the end of July. And that was 2 months after the publication date at the end of May this year. So it was an initial indication of potential problems being able to complete audits. And the fact that your accounts weren't yet published was mentioned at the last audit committee. So we then updated that assessment in early September, and at that point you had still not published your 23-24 accounts, and processes were still ongoing to actually pull those together and to therefore publish them. So that meant we weren't able to be in a position to start the audit as planned, with the requisite initial information provided beforehand to let us kick off, such as information downloads from your ledger. So I'm sorry to say that we've had to take the difficult decision to deprioritise your audit and move the resources to other audits that were ready and have published their accounts on time, or either into the team completing the disclaimer project for 22-23 audits. Now, this is a change from our position as at the last Audit and Governance Committee, and I'm not trying to hide that from you at all. We have had to put in this place this new prioritisation strategy following the publication of legislation and the guidance, and we're still operating under the national guidance that other sectors should not be affected. So we can't pull our people off NEO, higher education or NHS audits, for example, and put those at risk. So we've had to make this prioritisation decision, and we've done so in what we believe to be a consistent and equitable manner. It's not going to be much consolation, but you're not alone in this position. And while I don't have comparative numbers, the communications nationally from the ministry, the newly named MHCLG, the National Audit Office and the FRC, for example, all recognise that there are going to be hundreds of disclaimers likely for both 22 and 23-24 audits. We have committed to officers that when you do publish your accounts, which I know are published now, we will reassess if circumstances change and release audits from elsewhere. We will reassess whether we can actually come back and start and complete your audit for the year. I do need to clarify that we will be doing the value for money work, that's a must, and we will also be completing the work on your pension fund accounts for 23-24, and that's substantially complete already, and there are no issues to draw to your attention from that audit. But as it stands today, we don't have a team allocated to your council financial statements, and therefore it is likely that we will disclaim those similar to the disclaimer for 22-23. So I very much appreciate that's not a message you would want to hear, but that is the update as of today. I'd be happy to take any questions the members might have.
Thank you for that, and you explained all that to me last week as well. It is very unfortunate, of course. I think you did say, and I'm sure Mr. Downer can confirm that our accounts are not published, so at least we are in that position. But of course, that's not necessarily much comfort in the sense of what you've just outlined. Hopefully, your reassessment may lead to us being in a happier position, but I accept that we probably won't. Colleagues, do you have questions on what Mr. Souter has outlined? Councillor Quirk.
Not a question as such, but basically we are where we are, and it's not the fault of the council or of the auditors. So thank you for the report and the update.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any other comments or questions on this? If I could just ask the officer to sort of give us an outline. Obviously, last Audit and Governance Committee, we did not have this situation necessarily anticipated to us. So if you could just outline, this is not absolutely stress a search for blame or fault or whatever, just an understanding of what might have arisen in that time, so that you weren't able to tell us this could happen at July's meeting, but has now happened.
Yeah, along the way so far. So we've been planning on an audit occurring around the beginning of October. The work to complete the accounts has been long and difficult this year, in particular around the valuation of assets, which is always a complex area. The sample size for assets was significantly bigger than the previous year. So around 375 assets had to be valued compared to about 200 the year before. So the task took a bit longer than expected. As I say, we were working to that end of September. We have now published last Friday a full set of unaudited accounts. We've responded to all the audit data analytic requirements that were also due on the 27th, so they were responded to in time. And it's just unfortunate, I think, that the government update has come between the committees and it's sort of caught up with us a little bit.
Obviously, a bit more of a workload there. How much of that is the capacity of the organisation to do that work?
So there were two key vacancies through that period: the capital accountant, which leads on the asset work, and the financial accountant, which leads on the main statements work. So I can say that we have recruited a finance manager that starts in October. So I'm confident going forward that we'll have the resources back in place.
I think that's really important, because obviously next year there'll be a similar round of work to go through, and the year after and the year after. And one of the things that I may raise later on is the impact that we have of there being vacancies and lack of capacity within the organisation. So it's something we need to be alive to. But otherwise, I think as Councillor Quirk said, we are where we are. We know where we're going to be. We are, as Mr. Souter said, not alone. There are many local authorities in this situation, and it's a consequence of some ongoing things, obviously, over a number of years. But if there are no further comments, shall we take it that we have noted the report, which we shall do so. And thank you for your time on that, Mr. Souter. Is there anything you want to say just before I move to the next item, agenda item?
No, nothing else from us to add at this time. Thank you.
No. Thank you. You are, of course, welcome to observe the rest of our meeting, as in, well, you would be welcome anyway as a member of the public, but as an interested party, you're particularly welcome to what else we get up to today. Which moves us to item 6, which is the internal audit progress report. Those are pages 19 to 68 of the report pack. Invite the Chief Internal Auditor to introduce those, and particularly to note that there are 2 reports of limited assurance for which the usual process has been followed, that we have the full report before us this morning.
Thank you and good morning all. Quite rightly, there are 2 reports that are attached to this progress paper. Both of them relate to 23-24. They're limited assurance audit reviews. So they're the tail end, but they would not have influenced the overall opinion that I gave back in July. The 2 reviews that are contained within, one is in relation to governance arrangements under the old regeneration projects and schemes, and the second review is asked area placements. Both have similar themes, those themes being it's the documentation and the paperwork that supports a lot of the decision making. However, since performing the piece of work, there are robust action plans in place by both service areas to address any of the issues moving forward. And I noted that both representatives, directors from the various areas are also here to discuss any finer points that I can't answer in relation to our papers. In relation to the 24-25, the work is progressing. There has been a small amount of movement in relation to our work, which is to facilitate a couple of grants. There's one area in the paper that I want to bring your attention to, which is on page 47, and that's where an exception is noted as being high, whereas it should actually be noted as being medium. And the only other thing that I wanted to bring your attention to is on page 37, there is a narrative in there and an acronym which states COMP. That is in relation to a grant, and I am struggling to remember what COMP actually stands for, but it's a grant verification that we need to sign off that has been added to the plan. But I make certain that we don't use acronyms in future that I can't remember when I attend the meeting. Beyond that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
If I kick us off, are we satisfied that all those in the governance report on regen, a lot of those were actions to be done by dates that are in the past to this meeting? Are all those actions, do we know if all those actions have been actioned?
I think we are reasonably comfortable, in fact, in relation to any retrospective elements. I think that is a fair point, though, to recognise that it is retrospect. It is clearly moved where it reports to, and which is why I've said there are very robust arrangements now in place to ensure that we don't end up in with the same common themes and issues.
And just continuing on that, I think it would be really important that we have a report at the next committee meeting to confirm that actions have been taken and completed. One thing I note about the governance side of things, I know that the chief executive is held up in another meeting at the moment, but one thing I'd be very keen to know that where members of staff move on, or for whatever reason, that we capture their institutional knowledge through some sort of process at the end to make sure we haven't missed anything, but actually it's all about processes recording that knowledge all the way through. I saw in one place where I think I'd recommend where it says something must be considered, then there should be a record that has been considered and things like that. Even if it's as simple as emailing somebody else to confirm, and therefore there'll be a date and time stamped email that says I did consider this, and this is my reasoning. I don't want to bog the organisation down in too much paperwork, but I think some things like that are easy to miss. And so if the way in which things are being considered allows for that to be recorded, then that's going to be very helpful. I know, Councillor Quirk, you have some concerns to raise around the other limited assurance report.
I think both reports raise some serious concerns. I think the actions agreed and going forward are important, appropriate, particularly on the appropriate in terms of the regeneration work. I do think we should formally note that we'd like that to come back to us with a report and an update until such time at each of our meetings, until such time as all of the actions are complete. In terms of the children's services out of island placements, this has been an area of concern for some time because a lot of these have been made in sort of fairly quick decisions at the last minute. And whilst situations change, by and large, the people who are involved and the young people who are involved are actually known to us in advance. But it's something changes in terms of the coping mechanisms of the people around them. Sometimes they have to be off island, I accept that. But I think we should be looking more strategically at this issue. I'm told we don't have the resources, we don't have the skills on the island, but we should be questioning whether we could have the resource, we could have the skills, we could train the people, and whether there is a better value for money way of doing this, because the cheap ones are £250,000 a time and the expensive ones are over £1 million a time. And that seems quite excessive. And most people agree that it's better that most of the kids are better closer to their families and contacts. So I think we need to do the things that are listed, but I think there's a bit more that needs to be done. And I think that there are some questions that should be being asked about how do we bring this under control? Because this is a major budget pressure area, and we've shown that the systems aren't actually working to control it. And even if they did control it a bit better, are we really doing the right thing in terms of what is in the best interest of the children rather than the ease of placement? I just think it needs a bit more work done on that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Quirk. I know we have Kay Jones here, who's the service director. It'd be helpful if you could sort of respond to some of those points, but also just to indicate that most of your action dates are in the future. So if you can give some indication of how well you're progressing on those matters, that would be helpful as well.
Thank you. Sorry about that technology. Thank you for the comments that you've just shared. The outcome of the audit actually reflects our analysis of the service and the system that needs to be reviewed. You'll be aware that the partnership with Hampshire ended earlier this year, and since that point, being a new children's services and children's social care, there's been a number of reviews of strategic requirements, but also internal procedures and processes that are necessary to be reviewed, and that includes our sufficiency strategy. So you'll see from the audit overview that the sufficiency strategy expired last year, and there's been a delay given the change of arrangements with Hampshire and ourselves in regards to the review of that sufficiency strategy. But for myself, that's a crucial element of work. It's highlighted as an action within the audit outcomes. And what I'm doing at the moment, and it links into some of the comments that have been made, is I'm actually seeking external expertise and support in regards to a sufficiency improvement lead to be able to support us with that work. And that's about capacity within the current leadership structure, given the number of infrastructure changes that are being made and that are underway. So I'm out to recruit at the moment. I'm hoping within this month we'll bring in a sufficiency lead who will do the forensic analysis of the whole system, because that starts at the very front door. How are we maintaining children to stay at home, preventing them from requiring to be looked after, and then thereafter, if they do need to be looked after, as we've heard, it's about making sure we've got the right homes in the right place to prevent children requiring out of area placements. So that will certainly be underway, and then there'll be a project. Once that strategy is written, there'll be a project which will have a number of work streams, so that we can look at what our educare support is, how we achieve permanence for children, but also looking at our commissioning activity. So that's how do we interrupt the market so that we can create the right homes for children, look at the costs, the quality of care around those arrangements also. And another area will be about our fostering recruitment and retention activity, including our marketing opportunities to be able to create more foster carers on island, but also on the south coast where those children do need to move. So I want to assure you that that strategy will be underway as soon as we've appointed that person in post. Just going back to sort of the skill set and expertise within the service, I'm obviously the service director for children's social care, but that is my background. So my background is in sufficiency strategy, corporate parenting. So I'm very confident that we can do the analysis that's required and put in place the action planning that's required thereafter. From a sufficiency strategy, usually what we'll find is that there's cost avoidance opportunities and invest to save opportunities to create the right homes for children. It's unlikely that that will be achieved in this financial year. However, we'll be able to forecast going forward how we create those right homes. And like I say, it's about not just about cost of those homes, it's also about the quality of care.
Thank you for that. Councillor Quirk, do you want to come back, and then Councillor Jarman?
It might be worth making a recommendation from this committee to the Children's Committee, or whatever it's going to be called under the new structure, to look at this as an early item on their work plan.
Councillor Jarman.
Well, first of all, let me start off by thanking our Chief Internal Auditor for the report and for her emails that she's been in correspondence with, giving other explanatory information, which have been very helpful. Although those were mostly around failures to bring in the savings that were proposed last year, there is an impact here because we also brought in measures to the full council in the budget planning process back in February, which instigated invest to save opportunities on the island, not only in relation to, of course, children and bringing our children home, dealing with them on the island, but also to deal with relocatable housing and other matters. Now, those were all passed by full council and became part of the current budget process. It was unfortunate, of course, that the two senior members of the cabinet and the leader made statements that they had no intention of following them immediately following that meeting to the press. But leaving that aside, the key thing is that there were invest to save opportunities for this budgetary year. which are not becoming manifest. And that's a serious concern of mine. The other thing I would like to bring out here is that we did have a provision which was raised at our last meeting regarding the current budget cycle, where elements that needed to be accounted for in the audit and budget planning process relating to the take on of debt from schools or potential school closures would be included. And I think there was an uncategorical yes from the external auditors that that needed to be done. So 3 items there that I'd like to raise. One is the failure to bring forward within this financial year the invest to save opportunity regarding children. The second one is clearly the issue regarding relocatable housing, which has not been affected. And the third one is just that reminder that when we do the audit, we should respect that very clear statement from the external auditors that provision needs to be made in the budget and in the accounting processes for the, well, always, not just for any particular year, relating to the take on of liabilities. In this case, particularly those related and expected for school closures. So if we could make a note of those 3 components, and I'm sure the audit staff and children's services and others will be able to ensure that those elements are replicated in the various documentation.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Does any officer want to comment on what Councillor Jarman has said at the moment? There's a point at which the work of audit ceases and the work of scrutiny takes over in terms of making sure that Cabinet in this case delivers on certain things. I'm still getting used to audit, but audit is about making sure things are done properly. What is decided to be done is done properly, simplifying enormously in terms of the extent to which it's for another body to hold to account the non-delivery of certain things may be elsewhere. But I believe in a no wrong door approach to questions. So if an officer wants to comment at the moment on this, but otherwise I'm sure Councillor Jarman will in any case pick it up in other venues. But it is important. It is important. The council works as a whole and not in silos. So our committees, whilst we do have terms of reference, not completely walled off from each other. So any officer wish to comment at this stage on what Councillor Jarman has said? Ms. Hubbleday.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Jarman. On the your final point about making sure there's provision for liabilities and including the school place planning outcomes. Of course, the budget process that we engage on for setting the budget each year in February will gather all the information around all the liabilities that we are aware of within the council. So each directorate will put forward any of the budget pressures. And for example, I know for a fact that obviously the impact of school place planning, once the decision is been made in December, will be taken into account in that process as well. So we do go through a complete exercise to gather all of that information every year when we set the budget and try not to let anything slip through the net.
Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Scary. I have actually engaged with Adrian Whitaker, and we had quite a lengthy conversation about school debt last week as well. So I'm very confident that he's on the ball with those issues and will be bringing them forwards. I understand that the current report is due at the end of October, and then final reforecasting figures will be published in November. So that will be in sufficient time to be included in the next year's budget. I did seek to get early information about what they might be. I was not entirely successful in that regard, but it is also necessary, of course, to ensure that they accurately reflect the creation of the academy as well, which took money out of the system. And that money has now been transferred across, so needs to be accounted for as well. I'm sure the internal auditors have got those details. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any other questions or comments on the Chief Internal Auditor's progress report? Otherwise, we are due to vote it. Yes. Um, with um, with the view, though, that reports on both of our limited assurance, or the limited assurance reports that were given to us, that something can come to us at our next meeting on the extent to which all the actions have been delivered upon, or otherwise. Mr. Rayland, do you want to add?
Sorry, just a brief comment on the regeneration report. It was something that was commissioned by myself as a result of taking on that particular aspect of the service in an expanded directorate. So the findings for me are, yes, they were rather worrying, but I would like to give the assurance now that we've put the actions in place to actually make sure that we cover those off, and we actually ensure that the processes and procedures are being followed as were being followed with the rest of the directorate that adds on to the one I've just inherited. So just a general out there that I actually commissioned that audit report in order to learn the lessons and in order to make sure that the right processes and procedures are put in place.
That's helpful, but certainly I would personally would like to know, and I'm sure the committee would like to know, that actions have been closed, basically, that we know that that's the case. So that we all have been in working environments where dates get set, and for no fault of anybody, it's not necessarily possible to complete by a certain date, but we need to know that there's progress, particularly around issues where the audit process has found limited assurance. And I think actually, to some extent, it would be useful for us as members to reflect upon the experience around regeneration in terms of just making sure that what we decide and put forward enables the organisation to keep capturing that knowledge. Some of that knowledge, and I say that partly because some members themselves may leave this authority next year by choice, or of somebody, the electorate, if not themselves. And actually their own institutional knowledge is important, and they may want to reflect on making sure that is fed back in some way. But otherwise, we will note the Chief Internal Auditor's report with thanks. As always, I'm grateful to both her and Mr. Newton for their briefings that I get from them on these matters, and look forward to there being cheering news on actions being taken at our next meeting. Okay, in which case I'll move on to, we've got two reports on Treasury Management, the Treasury Management Annual Report. Let's go.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to apologise for having to present two papers at this meeting due to the fact I failed to make the deadline for the previous audit meeting. Looking at the outturn report for 23-24, I don't propose to go through in detail. I'm just going to bring out a few highlights for you. The interest rates from the Bank of England actually increased throughout the whole of 23-24 from 4.25 to 5.25%. This has a knock-on effect, obviously, on the amounts that we have to pay on our short-term borrowing. And also it has an effect on the amounts we receive for any investments that we have. What this has meant, it meant that we actually made a saving of 4.6 million over the year. This is because a lot of our borrowing is actually long-term rather than short-term, so it's fixed. So it's only the small amount of short-term borrowing that we have that will be affected by the rates change. We actually did have a decrease in borrowing. The actual amount we borrowed of about 17 million. This is comprised of 5 million of which was the repayment of a loan which is called a LOBO loan, which is a lender's option, borrower's option loan. And that was repaid in November. The main principle of this loan is that at any time, the lender can increase the interest rate. And the borrower then has an option whether they want to accept that increase or to repay the loan. Up until sort of back end of 2023, there was no real issue with it being increased because the interest rates were quite low. But as interest rates went up, obviously the lender decided that they wanted to increase the rate, and at that point we decided we would repay it. We did not take out any additional borrowing specifically to repay the loan. So we, in some ways, we saved ourselves some money on that, but it would have reduced the amount we had obviously invested. We also had repaid some money for the PWLB long-term loans that we have. About 50% of that, about 6 million of that was for historic loans. And there was about 5.5 million related to repayments of loans that were taken out reasonably recently. I think about 2020 was the last one. And these are what we call equal instalments principal. So every 6 months we make an instalment payment of the principal, and the interest is calculated on the amount that is then outstanding. So we're gradually paying those loans off, so there won't be any big balloon payments at the end of the year, end of their term, I mean. Overall, we managed to comply with all the Treasury and prudential indicators throughout the year. So that was really, really good. We're really pleased with that. Apart from that, I don't have anything specific I want to say on that report, unless anybody has any questions they would like to ask.
Thank you, Ms. Cook, for that. Colleagues, any questions on that report? It would appear not, but then it is a very complete report, as your reports always are. But Councillor Quirk has come in now. Yes.
Just to note that once again, Treasury management seems to come good and put some positives onto the, the news sheet. Thank you very much.
Indeed, anything that comes out positive, but bearing in mind the other pressures on the council's finances, it's very, very good. But otherwise, I think we can note your report and move on to your second report. And no need to apologise for bringing two.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the Q1 24-25 report. In this quarter, so this takes us up to the end of June, there was no change in the Bank of England interest rate. So that was in some ways made life a little bit easier because you're not worried about rates going up or down. However, in August, so in the second quarter, there was a reduction. Arlene Close, our investment manager, are still forecasting a reduction down to about 3% by the end of 2025. So we're just sort of keeping an eye on that because that will make it will change the way we have to work things. There's not a huge amount to note on this, apart from one item. Throughout in the quarter, we took out we agreed a credit facility with Sovereign Network Housing. This is an option to lend them £5 million. It's for a period of 3 years with a 2-year option to extend. We will receive a small percentage, I think it's about 0.12%, of the loan that has not been utilised, and that is chargeable in quarterly instalments. And then if they do request a drawdown of the loan, they'll be paying us about 2.5% above base rate. So at the end of the day, we would still be able to invest the money in our money market funds, so we'll earn interest on that. And if they don't draw it down, we get a little bit extra. If they do draw it down, we have to sacrifice the money market investments, but we get 2.5% above base rate. So in some ways, it struck us as a very good deal. It's something I'm not aware of as having done before. It was sanctioned by the Section 151 officer before we undertook it, and it was on the recommendation of Arlene Close, our investment advisors. So it was all done, and we've got a legal agreement with it. So that's all. It was all done according to procedure. So at the moment, at the end of June, it would literally just been signed off. So, and at this point in time, we have not been requested to lend them any money, but I will advise you as and when that instance arises. On the performance side, so far we've contributed about 0.9 million towards these savings. Well, at the end of June we had for the council, so that we're starting to gradually see where we can help the council out with their bottom line. And again, we have managed to comply with the Prudential and Treasury management indicators. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jarman.
Can I ask with Sovereign what capital guarantees they've got against any loan that they take out from us?
We have, I'm not actually aware of if there's any capital guarantees. I know we've got a loan agreement with them. It would be the same as any other short-term loan that we would make to a local authority or another housing provider. I could actually certainly look up that information for you, Councillor Jarman, and send that through to you.
If you could, and just share with the committee, that would be helpful. And I'm always keen with the answers. They don't just come to one person, but they're shared collectively.
Not a problem. I'll get that circulated.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Jarman.
Can I just go to table 1 on page 104? We're forecasting for 25 quite significant increases in CFR, and I wonder if you could just talk us through what the major elements were that were driving those changes. I'm not too sure if this is you, Joe.
Probably going to defer that to Barry Downer, because it's more his field than mine, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the CFR is mainly driven by the capital programme. So there's some chunky bits assumed in the capital programme, the current approved programme for things like housing, where some element of borrowing would be required to progress some of those schemes.
So how much of that is accounted for simply by borrowing for housing, please?
It's tens of millions that's in the capital programme relating to housing. I can find that number out.
I could just add while Barry's looking at that. It's essentially the 40 million which was approved. So because none of that's actually been drawn down yet, it's reprofiled each time we produce the annual report, Treasury management and the quarterly report. So it will be the profile of that 40 million will be the large driver for any of the changes.
But just a follow-up then, and I'm sure I know Chris would want to come in as well.
I just wanted to know what reprofile means.
Carried forward because it hasn't been done. In this case, is that correct interpretation?
Is it just carried forward as it is?
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Yes, that's right. So because it hasn't been spent and that approval is still technically there, but it's obviously all subject to relevant business cases being approved. That is still part of the existing capital programme, but it gets slipped forward if we move into a new financial year and that money hasn't actually been drawn down. So that's what the reprofiling is.
So my follow-up question is probably quite an obvious one, which is that if it's simply being carried forward, why is there a net increase? If the amount in year A is slipped forward to year B, surely that 40 in one year doesn't have a net increase in the 40 in the following year. It's that element that I didn't understand.
It's the impact it has on the capital financing requirement. So at the point we draw down that money and it becomes active within the capital programme, the cost of the CFR goes up that year. So that's why it goes from the 385.7 and then it's forecast as 417. So we're forecasting potentially a spend against that allocation in a future year. So that's what pushes the CFR up in that time frame.
So was it the case that in 24 we were not forecasting a spend against the allocation?
Yes, we were, but of course this is the actual, not the budget forecast position in this table. So because we haven't actually drawn it down, there has been no spend, but there was always a profile for that 40 million anyway. It was always going to be over more than one financial year. But it's as that slips because there's no actual, that it changes the forecast upwards in subsequent years.
And with your indulgence, Chair, just one more question on this point. So is it correct that we are now forecasting the spend of the entire 40 million in that 2025 forecast? Because I'd always assumed it would be over a number of years, and therefore the impact on the CFR would have been spread over the same number of years, because we wouldn't have been assuming a spend of 100% in year one. It would have been.
It's not forecast all to be spent in 1 year. I don't know if Barry's got the numbers to hand now.
Yeah, I've got 12.5 million next financial year and 13 million the following year is the current profile, but that profiling gets revisited as we go through the budget process.
And are there specific projects against which those funds are being projected, or is it simply a speculative figure?
At this moment in time, there has been no projects brought forward with business cases approved against that sum, but it's still available should those come forward in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence on that extended point.
Happy to indulge you. It is, but it's very important to ask these questions. Colleagues, any other questions on this? Councillor Quirk.
You answered the question I was going to ask initially, was the reprofiling, and was that specific to a project, or is it just there to cover the projects that it was the sort of project that it was originally intended for? And what I'm hearing is it's still there, it remains there, it is still subject to the finances working and being signed off by the 151 officer. It is available for the sorts of projects that it was originally envisaged it would be applied to. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. There are no other questions or comments on this paper. We'll note with thanks, as always, and move on to item 9, which is the contract standing orders. Who have we got for this, Mr.?
Thank you, Chair. Steve Sandercock, interim procurement consultant working with Isle of Wight Council. So thank you for your time today. I'll look to present the report around the adoption of the revised contract standing orders. Before I make a start on the paper itself, I do note that there are a couple of points of corrections that need to be made on page 117, paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. It does make reference to the new Procurement Act coming effective from the 28th of October 2024. In both paragraphs, that has during drafting of the paper and presenting to today's meeting been pushed back to the 24th of February 2025. So like I said, just for factual correctness, the recommendation 4 has been updated, but the words within the paper on that point unfortunately got missed on final proofread. In terms of the paper that is presented before committee today, it is in response to the new Procurement Act that is due to go live, as noted on the 24th of February 2025. And in response, the council has to look at its respective governance arrangements to make sure that how it operates in undertaking procurement and tendering activities and contract management activities are in line with the requirements of that new Procurement Act. So the core document, the core governance document that relates is the contract standing orders. And during the summer of this year, there's been a working group, officer working group, looking at the review of the contract standing orders. And hence what is now presented to committee today is the output from the work that's been carried out. Alongside that, the work around the contract standing orders, and again very much in line with the intent and the focus for the new Procurement Act around transparency, there's also presented a conflicts of interest policy, which builds, like I said, builds on the requirements of the Act itself. So the work that has been presented is the key changes that have been set out to the new the new contract standing orders from the existing contract standing orders are very much set out in Appendix 3, which accompanies this paper. And it sort of sets out the comparison and also the key changes within each section from the old or the existing contract standing orders and the proposed contract standing orders. And the other factors which then have been taken into account is part of the redrafting. We would hope to think that the layout and the structure of the new contract standing orders have been improved. So, for example, it incorporates clearer sections, it incorporates a clearer flow through the document in terms of sequencing of activities that would be expected, paragraph numberings, and also use of tables to present some key data. It also looks to streamline some of the spend levels that are set out where the council has opportunity to put in place its own sort of spend process for below threshold spend, and also clarity of processes as to whether consideration is taken into account as to whether or not a procurement activity is required in the first instance or not, and then also where we can make use of existing frameworks by other contracting authorities, then those have also been put into the revisions within the contract standing orders themselves. So with that paper being presented on page 117 of the report, there are the three recommendations that are set out. First one, that the contract standing orders as attached in Appendix 1 are approved and adopted with effect from when the new Act comes into force, which is now the revised date of the 24th of February 2025. That the conflicts of interest policy, which is the Appendix 2 document, is approved and adopted from today's date, and we would operate that process from now. And on item 6, paragraph 6 on page 117 is that delegated authority given to the Director of Corporate Services in consultation with the Chair of Audit and Governance Committee to make any final minor typographical amends and further minor amends that may be required to the contract standing orders because of the delayed operational date, and any subsequent secondary legislation which may come into place during that time period. So with that in mind, Chair, I would happily take any questions that may arise from the floor.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jarman has a question or two.
Or three. So I'm very happy with the paper, and I understand about the delay. I noted that myself earlier, but the question I had is related to the recommendation point 6. And my concern here is that there are likely to be follow-on elements to this Act when it's implemented. And it's very likely or possible that the date may be pushed back even further. We don't know that yet, but that seems to be, you're nodding as well. I got the same thing when I was looking online. So what I'd like to do is just make a small change to that item 6, that we reflect here that it's that the consultation is not only with the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, but whichever committee should follow on from that under the new committee system, so that we cover ourselves not having to bring back another change to the policy to change that element, perhaps in February or March or April, and that it can continue as is. So if people are happy to do that, I'm happy to make the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you for that. I can't recall what it's named in the draft provisions, but certainly anything that just said that clarifies that, or its successor committee would be helpful. For myself, can I just thank you for Appendix 3? I thought that was the most useful appendix to be able to see the changes brought out in that way. I am not going to pretend in any way to be an expert on this. And I think this is one of those cases that, other than that, I'm sure some of our colleagues have expertise in this area, that we rely on our understanding that the people drafting this are expert in their areas, and that does seem to be the case. One thing that was interested me is how do you test before finally sort of signing off on putting this to committee? Have you tested with any colleagues that what you have written and set out is indeed clearer and easier to use?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, we have. We have engaged with certain key individuals within the council. So, for example, within the capital and the works team in particular, where we do have some degree of flexibility that we can build into the arrangements, and certainly the feedback that we've had from there has been very positive. That they see that steps are, we have, if you like, streamlined process and taken out some artificial barriers that were already in the original contract standing orders. So yes, we have tested that out, and we've, I hopefully we're in a pretty good place for when the new Act does go live, and like I said, hopefully it will see benefits in how the council operates in this space.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jarman again.
2 of 3. Could you just confirm whether this policy, when it does come into effect, these measures regarding procurement, will have a retrospective effect on existing ongoing contracts? The one I've got in particular in mind here is the PFI agreement, where we give them additional work. So I'm looking over at Colin as well, hoping he's going to glance up at this stage because I mentioned the word PFI. But so would it have, which would take precedence? Would it be an existing rolling contract, particularly one potentially without end, or would it only be to new contracts that were established?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Councillor. The way that the new legislation will work and operate is that any procurement activity that has commenced, and by commencement, that means that a contract notice around the opportunity is formally published on Contracts Finder. So if it's commenced before the go live date, and we assume that now to be the 24th of February, then the existing public sector procurement legislation will apply for that procurement activity and also throughout the life of that contract being managed. So if that's a 4-year arrangement that is published as a tender opportunity before the 24th of February 2025, then that will the existing public contract regulations 2015 will apply for both the activity around the procurement process, but also the contract management arrangements need to be in line with that piece of existing legislation. It will the new Procurement Act will only then be for any procurement activity that commences on or after the date of go live, so the 24th of February 2025, as currently stated.
So just for clarity, if an additional procurement activity was commenced after that date between the council and Island Road, for example, but under an earlier PFI contract, would the additional procurement activity fall under the new regulations or the old ones?
If that is any activity or work in line with the existing PFI that has been set up and established, then that would be in line with the existing public contract regulations. So it would only be if it was an entirely new form or shape of the of a contract, if you like, that is set up. So the existing PFI arrangements, it was very much established under the existing public contract regulations, so that should suffice in that sense.
Thank you. And 3 of 3 was just on the elements of aggregation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk to us a little bit about how, because I did read it a couple of times and it didn't settle well in my mind, the understanding of how the aggregation provisions would kick in with procurement?
Yes, overall aggregation of contracts under the public contract regulations and also now under the Procurement Act are set out. So there are specific provisions as to how spend is calculated. The overall principle is that where there is similar or like spend for a council, then all of that spend should be then taken into account when establishing the procurement threshold under which you're then tendering that for. So if it's a particular project which you've got a particular timeline and you can then estimate that the value is for the duration of that project to be delivered, then that would ultimately form the calculation. If there isn't a defined timeline and it's an ongoing arrangement, then the usual rule is that it would be then deemed as a 4-year arrangement. So, for example, if you're spending £50,000 of a year estimate, then it would then be a calculation based on a 4-year basis. But overall, each arrangement would need to be looked at in a case-by-case basis, and we would then be making sure that we're acting, or the officers involved should then be looking to ensure that they're acting in line with the relevant section in the Act itself.
So I can imagine a number of instances there where procurement activities in adult social care, for example, would accumulatively reach those levels, whereas individually they may not within each financial year. Would that be a classic example of what you've just said?
Yes, there may be, and what we would look to do then. So, if, for example, it's adults and it's placements, then we would then be looking at the totality of placements, for example, to look at that and then making sure that we've then got a compliant above threshold arrangement in place in those situations, and then the individual placements would then be covered under that that overarching arrangement, commercial arrangement that we have established.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that sequence of questions. I knew somebody would be more expert than me on at least in asking the right sort of questions. Colleagues, have you got any other questions or comments on these reports? If not, we do have to make a decision, and those have been set out earlier by Mr. Sandercock as the recommendations, which are 117, 4, 5, and 6. I won't repeat them out loud. They are to be revised with to include to the or its successor committee after the chair of Audit and Governance Committee there, which I think is very helpful. I'll move from the chair that we do accept those recommendations. Those seconded by Councillor Jarman. So those in favour, please show. And that is unanimous. Thank you again for your work on that and your colleagues. It is a technical area, but a very important area. I think Councillor Jarman has made sure that it's been well tested, but the proof will, of course, be in the pudding of when they are actually in place. One of which will be, of course, from the moment of our decision, which is the conflicts of interest policy. Great. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
And on that, we'll move to item 10, which is Council's risk profile, pages 189 and onwards in the pack. The Chief Executive has now been able to join us online. I see. I'll invite her if there's anything she particularly wants to, or one of her colleagues wants to, one or more of her colleagues wants to highlight to us. There's quite a lot of things, important things in that. But Ms. Pereira, is there anything you wish to add to that? Always assuming yes, she is there. Yeah.
Sorry, Chairman, I will be with you shortly, but in the interim, there's nothing that I wish to add to the covering report or the detail that's within it. And I note that Debbie Downer is within the room with you, and she will be able to take detailed questions on the risks themselves.
Thank you, colleagues. Any comments you make or questions you wish to raise on the risk profile? Comes to us, of course, each meeting to see that it is fit for its purpose. I think what's really very helpful is that Ms. Downer, you highlight in italics everything that is changing and particular pressures. I noted a number of places where there were particular pressures. The thing that concerns me overall is the ability for the council to deliver, given I think in a number of places there's commentary around staff capacity. And certainly I'd like to hear some commentary about that. And I know that from my own observations of CMT that this is taken very, very importantly, and I've questioned them in CMT about that. But are there any areas which are causing particular concerns at the moment? Or is there anything that we can do as elected members through obviously you respond most through cabinet members to identify what things are the greatest priorities to deliver upon, and therefore that it would be acceptable to deprioritize other areas? Anybody wish to comment?
I can just pick it up briefly, Chair. This particular issue around staff capacity was specifically looked at in the most recent CMT meeting, because we recognised, again, we've added, if you look at strategic risk 3, which I believe starts on page 196, the issue around the place planning requirements obviously is cross council in terms of the impact there from not just within the directorate directly affected, but also with potentially human resources, comms, everything. So that was looked at and added in as a current pressure. We also discussed whether that meant that the score needed to be increased. But I feel, from the meeting discussion, whilst we're aware of the pressures, there are mitigations being put in place to try to address those as they come through, and they'll be continue to be put in where required. One good piece of noting is strategic risk 7 within the adult social care, where those standby issues have been resolved and therefore their capacity issue there has been resolved. So that will be taken out next time. You won't see that one again. That'll come out. And I think as noted in the report, obviously the likelihood that changes are ongoing as we go through this year in particular, and as those occur, they are addressed and discussed in CMT, as you said, Chair, to make sure that we have the most appropriate and up-to-date mitigating actions in place where possible.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any comments on this otherwise? Councillor John.
I just had two areas which I picked and made a circle on. One was on page 204, which was related to adult social care. I think we've all seen in the press recently that a number of representations continue to be made to the ICB about prioritising elements on the island. But there are a couple of statements which were highlighted on the right-hand column. One being that ICB budget challenges are impacting on the ability to discharge our health functions. And the second one, that ICB internal restructure is creating instability for workforce and interface with the local authority. And I wonder, it's nice to document that we have a problem, but I'm unaware of what actions there are to mitigate those. And if there's somebody who can expand on that or provide it later, that would be appropriate.
Chair, I can take that away and speak to the director if that's appropriate.
I think that would be very, very helpful, and Councillor Jarman picked up a point that I would otherwise have picked up, but I don't want to hog the meeting. Yeah, no, not at all. It is very important that our relationship with the ICB works, but I did notice that commentary around the bracketed point of off-island, the wider integration off-island. I think it is very important in any engagement that we have as an island authority with others on the mainland, that they understand the impact that engagement off-island does have on us. But I think coming back to Councillor Jarman's point, if we can have some commentary around that would be very helpful to all members. Councillor Jarman, do you have any more?
Yes, the risk element described about children's services, and we have seemingly we seem to be stuck in a cycle of being roughly about 60% reliant on external agency staff. It's a very high figure, first of all. Doesn't seem to have changed a great deal. And I wondered what measures we have to hopefully eventually eradicate that number or significantly reduce it, because clearly agency staff are always in these situations more expensive and bring other issues compared with our own staffing.
Is there anybody able to respond at the moment? We don't have the director on, do we? Otherwise, Councillor Bacon, do you want to comment?
The director's actually at the SEND partnership body. I've stepped out to come to this meeting, but that meeting is ongoing, which is the reason he's not here. I think it's probably better that a detailed answer is provided by the director. Certainly it is an issue, but it is something that is being addressed. But rather than try and go into detail here, it's because it's very operational some bit. I think if Mr. Whitaker is asked, he will be able to give a response to that.
Thank you for that. And obviously, the risk profile comes to us in December again, so we can pick up following on from the responses we do get from directors these matters. But in general, I know there is that concern about the budget side of things in children's services, particularly. I guess that's being picked up at the moment through the development of the budget. I think one of the things I always remind people that whilst the budget may be big, if it is well managed, it has a well mitigated risk. But I think that we are aware that there are certain aspects of children's placements which can bring pressures into the system which are unanticipated, although I've no doubt there's significant work done to ensure there's contingency on that. Colleagues, any other questions around here? I'm just particularly aware of the amount of italicized text that's coming in, but that's good. That shows it's a living document, but quite a bit of that, like there is pressure on the authority. I think one thing that's unpredictable at the moment. We do have a new government. New governments do legislate, and they do change things often in a bigger way than governments that continue in office, and we can't plan for that. But there will be changes coming through that we haven't anticipated. So I've no doubt that for future reports, this and successor committees will be seeing aspects of new legislation and regulation being addressed in italics. Certainly as chair as we come to the end of a 4-year cycle, I think these reports I find easier to get my head around and feel that it is clearer what the mitigations are, what the pressure points are, or whatever. But otherwise, colleagues, can we have to approve, don't we, on this one? So are we prepared to approve this on an ongoing basis? Yes, I'll move that from the chair. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. So that goes through. But, thank you for that, and welcome to the Chief Executive who has joined us, not online. So that moves us to 2 important items under item 11, the review of the Constitution. The first is on future governance update. We are the responsible body at the moment on that work, so the successor to the working group. It's within our terms of reference to have oversight on governance matters. We have a report from the Director of Corporate Services. I just remind the committee in open session, of course, that we do meet informally to review progress. I sit as chair of the committee on the project board for that, so there is a lot of activity in between our meetings, which is not just that of officers. There are reporting stages and opportunities to look at that. At some point, of course, we'll be moving to a place where hopefully we can be putting a draft. I really hope that we have a draft constitution that we put to final resolution, but before that, a draft constitution that all members can look at and pore through and eradicate as much as possible any places where there may be possibilities for confusion and whatever. We do need this constitution to be as fit as possible for the start of what is quite it is an important step, a very important step in the changes that we're going to do, make our decisions. But does the director corporate services want to add to anything? I think in this case it would be Claire Shand who might want to add anything to that.
Morning, committee members, and thank you, Chair. I don't think there's a great deal that I feel the need to say. It is, as you will see, a fairly short report on this occasion, but that doesn't mean to say that there's been very little going on. A lot of preparatory work has been undertaken in between times. And as you'll see, we have started the preparations on the constitutional elements, some of which has been shared already with committee members for them to review. And once we've kind of got that little bit over the hurdle, we're ready to be sharing some more detailed content with committee members so that we can take that forward in line with the timescales that we've set to achieve. But overall, I think it's fair to say, and I hope you will feel the same, Chair, that we are on target against the project plans, and they are themselves indeed very thorough and detailed in terms of the work that needs to be completed.
Certainly, as Chair, from both in the project board and in our informal A&G meetings, there's nothing that suggests to me that nothing is off track, which is good. I know it is a big piece of work, and I am very alive to the other pressures on all our staff. But colleagues, do you wish to? I know Councillors Jarman and Quirk, you were at the last informal meeting, so you may particularly have some commentary. But do you share my view that things are on track at the moment? Yes, there are nods. Any comments or questions at this stage? There are none. Thank you very much for that. Then we'll note the progress to date on that aspect of our constitutional responsibilities, and then move to 11B, which is on the budget setting process. The Chief Executive is in the room, so I'll ask her to introduce her report.
Thank you, Chair. And if you remember, this report comes out of a request from the Audit and Governance Committee to provide further legal advice in relation to a number of matters that had been raised in terms of budget setting and the Council's budget meeting. The advice that we've received is attached as Appendix 1 of the report. I think it is of itself self-explanatory. What it does do is raise some issues in relation to confusing language that is apparent in the current form of the Constitution, and as a result, you'll see before you that the recommendation in the report is to note the external advice that's been received, and then to consider some changes to standing orders on the budget meeting to resolve in the interim some of the issues that were raised in the legal advice, bearing in mind that we are undertaking a comprehensive review of the Constitution in relation to the future governance work. Nothing further to say on the report itself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I do agree with you that the advice itself sits for itself. It is important that we address those issues which relate to the fact that we do, before next May, have another budget cycle to go through. We need to take that through full council in an appropriate way. It was useful to see flagged up that this fettering of our fettering of our discretion was highlighted. I know I previously raised, in terms of what is recommended to us, I think I would need some greater clarification around what are relevant considerations. Otherwise, what I would dislike to see happening is, on the night of a full council, somebody in good faith bringing forward an amendment to the budget, only to have discovered that there was some further consideration that they had not been able to consider. I've tried to do some research with other councils close by and further afield as to how they manage the budget process. And one thing that I can say is no two councils are alike. Each is different, and I suppose one of the good things is whatever we may or may not recommend today for approval to next full council, this would only be in the interim, and that there's a wide piece of work anyway being done for the constitution from May 25. But those are my thoughts at the moment. But I'm really keen to hear the thoughts of colleagues. Councillor Jarman? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. If we go back to that meeting of the 29th of April, I hope all can remember that the discussion was very clear in the way that the process for conducting this analysis should take place. There were a number of provisions that we put into there explicitly. One was that discussions would occur between parties on the sharing of information real time with the external consultants, so that all information between the council and the consultant would be copied to the members, and that all member consultant correspondence would be copied to council officers. That did not occur. There were a number of reminders sent in by members inquiring as to the state of this project and requesting copies of the terms of reference, which were not answered. I believe there were 3 of those over quite a lengthy period of time. Consequently, the requirement of this committee for members to be able to engage directly with the consultants and to express their views was not met. That is, to me, quite a serious failing here. And it's resulted in a paper which, of course, lacks the clarity that some of us would like to have seen, and that you, in summary, have just expressed in your introduction. Given that the correct process was not followed here, I do not feel at all comfortable in us approving a paper or the recommendations of that paper, knowing that there is a failure process yet to be addressed. I've written to one of the senior officers involved in that procurement and asked what can be done to rectify that failure. I've not yet received a reply to that, but it would be good to get one. Again, without that clarification from the officer conducting the procurement and managing the process, again, I don't feel we can approve a paper which has been produced by a faulty process, and I'm choosing my words here quite carefully, without the input from members, and specifically not following the engagement protocol that was defined by this committee. So to that end, I don't want to remove everything, and I do want to see progress made. So I would very much like to hear from the officer involved in that procurement process how we can rectify this and move forward. But in the meanwhile, in not accepting the paper and not accepting the recommendations, the default is indeed option 4, which is for committee members to consider the proposed revised budget meeting standing orders as set out in Appendix 2, which I'm saying we've done but rejected, but refer them back for further revisions to be made and submission to a future audit and governance meeting. And whilst that is in some way satisfactory, because it implies the process is not yet complete, it does not address the current situation that we have. And so I would extend this by saying, and in the meantime, the existing standing orders to be followed, including the provision for members to have access to data and support to enable them to submit alternative budgets. And I think I just looking at Megan to make sure she was typing very quickly and got that accurately. The key thing here is that I don't believe there is a misinterpretation. I think there is a world of difference between an amendment, as we've used many times before in these documentations, and the word alternative. They are clearly different English language words, and they are used quite precisely in our current standing orders. Members are enabled to have data and support to provide alternative budgets. So the implication in the paper that somehow there's been a misunderstanding, which has gone on for years and years in this, nobody's ever picked it up, to me is rather absurd. They are different English language words used very precisely, never before challenged by the monitoring officer as in their language. Until last year when we sought to enact them and to take that right, which is given to members, any member of any group, to submit an alternative budget. And in rejecting this paper and those proposed options, and in recommending option 4 without amendment, all we are doing is carrying on with the existing standing orders, but being explicit as to their interpretation.
Thank you. There was a question within that regarding the process, Chief Executive. It's your report. Do you wish to comment on that? I'd note that the report discusses the resolved points of this committee of the 29th of April. But there was some other narrative ahead of that, which wasn't part of the resolution proper, which I believe is to what Councillor Jarman refers. Do you wish to comment?
Only in as much as Councillor Garrett, as you've already said, the process that was followed was as per the resolution of the committee. It is, of course, within this gift of the committee to consider that if it wants to undertake further investigation and conversation and dialogue around the content within the advice, option 4 remains open to it.
Colleagues, this is Councillor Critchison.
I thought the legal advice was quite clear there and that we should follow the recommendation that was in the report.
Other colleagues, Councillor Quirk.
The recommendations in the report dependent on the legal advice. Legal advice is given dependent on the questions that are asked of the legal advisors. And if you ask the wrong question, you don't necessarily get the right answer. I actually have some sympathy with the view expressed by Councillor Jarman that I don't think it's a satisfactory endpoint. I think we should have had interaction with members that seems to have been, for whatever reason, not to have happened. And I think that Councillor Jarman's proposal actually is reasonably sensible, and I'm quite happy to second that.
Before we get to points of votes on things, are there any other points that colleagues would like to make about this? So as Chair, if you'll indulge me, so obviously it's been a long-running issue. I'd hope that at the 29th of April we'd achieved a process going forward. It seems not to have satisfied Councillors Jarman and Quirk, at least in this matter. But what I would say is my view is that the officers acted in good faith on the resolution of the committee at that time. The documents transmitted through to the legal advisors were not just a set of terms of reference. I believe they did include the document that Councillor Jarman that you put forward, despite its couple of, I dispute its factual accuracy in a couple of places, but it was transmitted to them for their consideration as well. So I fail to understand what in effect has not been achieved. If we are to continue to dance on pinheads about what is or is not an alternative versus an amendment, I don't think we can make that progress forwards. In my experience in local government, there has always been a looseness of the language in terms of the way that politicians use the word alternative budget and when they really refer to an amendment. It was quite surprising to me that it emerged this year, because this council with many experienced members has managed to move forward with a budget amendment after budget amendment over many years. The other councils I've moved forward. I do believe there is confusing language, and I think that's what's been highlighted. I don't believe that the thesis advanced by Councillor Jarman stands up against the legal responsibilities of this council and the statutory rights given to the executive, and the way that unfolds. The only way an alternative budget could emerge is if the budget itself falls next year, in which case we have process for that. So I cannot support you, Councillor Jarman, I'm afraid, on your amendment. I certainly do think, though, that we should refer it back for further consideration, and that's because I believe the words relevant considerations still open up problems and areas in which it is possible for members to find themselves in good faith bringing forward something which is then ruled out suddenly at the very last minute, and I think that would test many members. But chief executive is beeping. That's okay. But I think you also indicated as well, so I bring you back in on that, and then we would move to the vote. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And you've raised a point which I was going to make, which is that the legal advice provided by Bevan Britons makes it very clear that amendment and alternative are two very different things, and makes the exact point that you said, that it's only after the budget that has been put forward by the leader with any subsequent amendments that members in the chamber feel are required to improve the budget in front of them, and that budget falls, that the council is able to look to an alternative budget. I think that point's made very clear in the legal advice, and I think that's why the legal advice suggested that in the standing orders we reframe the words that are used to make them more appropriate in relation to talking about the executive budget and amendments to that.
Thank you for that. There is a proposal, it has been proposed and seconded. Councillor Jarman has proposed that it be option 4 with additional words which have been captured by our officer here. Do you want to read back just to make sure that those have been captured properly?
Yep, so it's been proposed and seconded. Option 4, committee members considered the proposed revised budget meeting standing orders as set out in Appendix 2, but refer them back for further revisions to be made and resubmission to a future meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. In the meantime, the existing standing orders are to be followed, including the provision for members to have access to data and support to enable them to submit alternative budgets.
Is that in keeping with what you moved then, Councillor Jarman?
It is.
It is. Okay, so I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour of Councillor Jarman's proposal? That is 3. Those against? That is 2. So that passes. So that's the recommendation that will be placed in the. Be very clear. It will be the resolution of this committee. I'm sure, though, as with all resolutions of this committee, we must abide by statute. And I'm sure that if there's anything about that resolution that crosses over, then that will be covered. But hopefully we can make progress on this issue, and sweetness and light can break out at some point on this. Anyway, thank you for that. Item 12 is our work plan. Colleagues, you've obviously had a chance to look at our work plan. Our work plan has always got plenty to do, but that is a work plan that depends upon our officers doing that work. And I just take this moment to just thank them again for all of the work that is done on this. We may not speak a lot on some of the items, but that doesn't mean, I'm sure, that we don't pay a great deal of attention to the reports that come forward to us. So, and then item 13 is members' question time. Any questions from members? There are none, in which case can I thank you all for dispatching that business really rather efficiently today. And I'm very pleased because I know I need to be somewhere at 1 o'clock, and I know our committee our Democratic Services officer needed to. So I will see you all in December, I believe. Is that right? Yes. Yes. Thank you very much.